A number of protests have broken out in Iran, and it has to do with a number of different factors, including the economic situation and some aggression toward the religious rule and politicians that Iranians feel have reneged on their promises. Now, the protests, according to reports, began against rising prices, but have spiraled into a general outcry against clerical rule and government policies. Now, as some of you might know, Iran's government is essentially broken into two main parts. There are the elected officials, and then there are the religious leaders or the religious establishment. And the religious establishment goes around telling people what they can and can't do, essentially the morality police, and the elected officials are the ones who can get elected out of office if they don't follow through on their promises. But keep in mind that the big dogs, the ones who really have the final say, are the religious leaders in the country. Now, this developed into a broader anti-government demonstration calling for the release of political prisoners and an end to police beatings. So there's a lot of different things going on. Inflation is a big problem. The cost of eggs, for instance, has doubled recently. The unemployment rate is at 12.4%, which is obviously incredibly high. And a lot of this had to do with the sanctions, but since lifting the sanctions, the economy improved a little bit, but apparently there's now been a rebound.
Yeah, so there's a number of factors here. One is that they're not responsive to the people. Of course not. A bunch of clerics run Iran, and they say that the President Hassan Rouhani is a moderate cleric among the different clerics that the other clerics chose from. So it's all relative. And of course, as always, he broke his campaign promises. He said that he would work for the release of Mir Hussein Mousavi and Mehdi Karoubi, who were part of the uprising in 2009 when the people stood up against the Iranian leadership and the Green Movement. And he promised it in 2 different elections and never delivered. So their politicians, a little similar to our politicians in that sense. And you remember that the Arab Spring started in Tunisia because of economic turmoil. So economic turmoil often makes a giant difference. And if all of a sudden things that you buy every day are twice as much, well, you can buy only half as much food.
Yeah.
And then people get hungry and they get agitated and they get in the streets. There is one other element. The Saudis have been trying to destabilize Iran for quite some time now. And they're fighting them in Yemen because Iran is backing the Shia in Yemen and the Saudis are backing the Sunnis in Yemen. And there was recently a report out about how the Saudis had kidnapped the prime minister of Lebanon. And within that great New York Times article, they explained that the Saudi crown prince was trying to agitate Palestinians to rise up against Hezbollah, which is backed by Iran. So they've been trying to agitate to get people to rebel against the Iranian government. I got no love for the Iranian government. I wish the people in Iran would have a democracy and get rid of the mullahs. But there are a lot of forces at play here. And I had forgotten that until I was reading this, and I saw that one of the chants in the city that started everything, Mashhad in this case, was not Gaza, not Lebanon, my life for Iran, okay? Like, really? There are people out there that are worried about the price of eggs that are going on and chanting about don't send help to Gaza and Lebanon.
Right, so look, I think that there's some feasibility to what you're saying, right? Definitely, but also keep in mind that people in Iran are dealing with the inflation, dealing with massive unemployment, and they are also seeing their resources go toward, efforts in other countries. So the involvement in Yemen, involvement in Iraq, and so they're irritated at the military spending that's going on.
I don't believe
now.
it. I really, on that one, I don't. Like, are they restless? Yes, right. Is their government oppressing them? Yes. But is it theoretically possible that they're like, hey, why are you spending abroad when you should be spending at home? Of course, that happens in a lot of countries. But in this case, it is exactly the agenda of both Saudi Arabia and the US to say that, hey, don't agitate Hezbollah that could go against Israel or the Shia in Yemen. They're in the middle of that conflict. We just saw a report about how the Saudis are trying to meddle in Iranian affairs. It's just too convenient to be like, don't go to Yemen, don't go to Gaza and Lebanon, right? Eggs, the price of bread, I get that.
Yeah.
That seems like, what's going on here?
I mean, Is it true that Saudi Arabia's hands are in a lot of cookie jars? If we're talking about how overextended they are in different countries, for sure. Are they consciously part of a demonizing campaign against Iran and Shias? Like, undoubtedly. And are they at war with Iran in Yemen, Syria, through Hezbollah in Lebanon as well, and Iraq to some extent? Yes. But this protest and the critique of overspending in terms of militarism is kind of parallel to protests in the whole entire region. And is there some savviness of the population in regards to making those links in ways we don't make these links in the US? Yes, undoubtedly. I mean, you saw this also in Saudi Arabia in 2011. There were protests against the rise of price of milk, which is subsidized by the country. And you saw people questioning whether or not the government should continue its enormous expenditures outside of the country while it's taking away from the social services safety net. So those are things that are really part of like the heart of protest in the region, and actually did start the uprisings. And this is the point that we make in my book, Demanding Dignity, that most of these movements that called for the overthrow started with protesting against the rise of cost of bread, inflation, and unemployment. I mean, this is also part of the protest as well, 12.4% unemployment in Iran. And to give people some understanding of what Western unemployment is, it's around like 4%. So when they see an easing of sanctions and not a certain kind of proportional effect on their economic position, I think there is a lot of frustration. But I will also say, and I know I'm going on, this is like, this is my bread and butter. I love Middle Eastern politics, that Saudi Arabia and Iran are so much alike. I mean, 1979 is the time when the extremist regimes came to power in both countries. In Saudi Arabia, it was pretty common to see people wearing bikinis and swimsuits in hotel pools. Same thing with Iran. So I see them mirroring each other. And of course, there's multiple agitations on both sides. And the other really interesting thing is that they're also trying to use approaches to women's rights to try to squash and repress any sort of resistance to the regime's lack of supporting its citizens through economic incentives.
So in Saudi Arabia, women now have the right to drive, sort of, as long as they get permission from the males in their families. And then in Iran, at least I believe it's Tehran, they've allowed women. Okay, let me rephrase that. Women caught not wearing their headscarves might not be detained. Right. Okay.
Wow. Whoa. But only in Tehran, not in other parts of Iran.
Right.
So look, there's false moderation everywhere, and it's to serve as a release valve for all the pressure. So hey, we've got Hassan Rouhani, who's a moderate, and so what happened? They got rid of the sanctions and the deal that they did with the U.S. That's good for the U.S., good for Iran. And money was supposed to come back in the country. And inflation did go down for a little bit. Everybody's a little relieved. Now inflation's gone back up. Why? Because the elites, like here, took all the money.
Yeah.
And they didn't share it with the people of Iran. All their bank accounts got unfrozen. They took all that money out and put it in their pockets. So the mullahs, they wear their robes because they've got stacks of money underneath the robe. Okay. And here's another hilarious guy pretending to be a moderate. The head of the Mashhad's Revolutionary Court says, we consider protests to be the people's right. Oh, that sounds good, it's a good beginning. But if some people want to abuse these emotions and ride this wave, we won't wait and we will confront them. Okay, It sounds like, no, you're not in favor of protests and you don't think it's their right, and you will crush them. And that's what they're doing. They're arresting people in a lot of these different cities. Some 52 arrested in one of the cities, and it's spreading across Iran. So I don't want anybody to get me wrong. I think I would be surprised if most of it was not organic, because there is a ton of pent up frustration in Iran, as there should be. And so it'll be interesting to see where it goes.
I mean, but there's frustration in Saudi Arabia to see the kind of expenditures that are taking place in terms of the military campaigns in Yemen and the destruction that's happening in Yemen, and also the frustration with the Crown Prince, who's taken that over as his mission. And so there are I see what you're saying, and I do think that there is probably international interference for sure, but I do think people see so much government spending on the outside and nothing in their coffers and get frustrated.
Yeah. Absolutely, and I totally agree with you, Maytha, that it's fundamentalist birds of a feather flock together. And so Saudi Arabia and Iran think they're radically different because one is Sunni and one is Shia. Okay, so I'm not a religious person, so to me, there's absolutely no difference between those. Oh, one thinks that the fourth caliph was a legitimate caliph, and the other one thinks the third one was.
No, it's super important.
Okay, for all sane people, that is enormously irrelevant. You're both acting in the same exact way, and it's fundamentalist, and it oppresses your own people. No one really cares what you call it. We know what it is in reality. What you just watched was one of the videos that we do today, but we actually do a whole 2-hour show every single day. It's a podcast. You could watch it in video or listen to it as audio. You can download it, you can stream it, and you get it completely ad-free if you could become a member of the Young Turks. TYTnetwork.com/join.